Hello, I'm Mr. Wilde, and in this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to make a bowl using a slab drape mold technique. The type of clay I'm using is a stoneware cone 5. It's important to know which cone fire your clay is for firing later on, but this is the completed but unfired slab drape mold bowl that I'll be making. These are the equipment and tools I'll be using for this project, and I'll supply a link at the end of this video for all my tools. About 7 pounds of stoneware cone 5 clay, fettling knife, needle tool, wooden knife, loop tool, wire clay cutter, sponge, 9-inch square Amico Plastibat, a 13-inch round Amico Plastibat, a rolling pin, clay thickness strips, which are just long, thin pieces of wood cut to the same thickness, plastic wrap, or like a saran wrap or even newspaper, a bowl, a football, and some embroidered shirts with exposed stitching that I'll use to press into the clay. I'm using a large piece of cardboard to create a barrier between the clay and the countertop so the clay won't stick to the countertop. I'm cutting off a chunk of clay, approximately 7 pounds. Yours can be a little smaller, that'll be fine. I'll start by pounding the corners to round them off. The slab does not have to be a perfect circle. In fact, since I'm going to be using a football to drape the clay over, an oval is the preferred shape. I start out patting the clay with my hands and will even use the rolling pin to help flatten it out. Notice that I turn the clay over occasionally. It helps to work the clay from both sides, and it keeps the clay from completely sticking to the flat surface. Then I move on to the lift and throw technique. Please take note that I'm not dropping it or throwing it straight down. If you do that, you end up with a thick middle and super thin edges, when what you really want is an even, flat slab. Now I'm moving on to the rolling pin and clay thickness strips. I try to set the thickness strips as far apart as possible, but still allow the rolling pin to stay on both, similar to train tracks. Sometimes I'll roll the rolling pin side to side, and when I do this, I try not to go to the absolute edges of the clay, as it's really easy to make the ends too thin. If you need a reminder about slabbing clay, you can visit my video on how to make clay slabs. I'll share that link in the description. Because of the effect I want to achieve, I'm not going for a perfectly shaped oval. I want the clay thickness to be even, but my oval doesn't have to be perfectly symmetrical. I have a couple of embroidered shirts that I'm using to create an impressed pattern. Leaves, pine needles, textured fabrics, and jewelry also work. Really, if you can press it into the clay, it'll work. You just need to be careful not to press too hard to where the clay gets too thin. But as I lay down the shirt, I want the embroidered pattern to bleed over the edge of the shirt. And so I just kind of feel with my fingers to where that shirt, where that design hangs over the edge. When I roll with the rolling pin and press into the clay, I'm just really deliberate and really careful to make sure I'm just rolling on those impressed patterns. I'll reposition the shirt, again making sure the embroidered surface is actually sitting on parts of the clay. And then again, you'll notice how careful I am with the rolling pin just to roll it on those embroidered parts that I want pressed. So for this project, I am actually going to impress the other side of the clay as well. So what I'm doing is I'm just flipping that over, kind of using my shirt now as that barrier to keep the clay from sticking to the surface of the countertop. But then I just use that same technique. I have a second embroidered shirt with a similar type pattern. They're not exactly the same, that's fine. Then I just find the last place where there needs some embroidering to be and I press it in there. I just wrap the clay up in the shirt and move it to the side as I move on to the next step. I have my 13-inch round plastibat, the bowl, and the football. And I'm just using a plastic wrap to wrap up the football. I want to create a barrier that'll go between the football and the clay. One of the steps I forgot to do, I'm going back, is I am cutting the edge of the clay to give it a nice clean cut edge. Again, it's not a perfect oval. It doesn't have to be. You'll see why a little bit later. But I'm going to take those scraps, I'm going to squeeze them into a rough cylinder shape, twist it just a little bit, and then I'm going to roll it into a coil. Once I have the coil, I'm going to form it into a small oval. That small oval is actually going to be the foot of the project. It's going to be what the project sits on. The drape mold itself is going to become a bowl, and with a round bottom, it would tip over without any kind of a foot. So as I cut the clay, I'm cutting it at an angle. So instead of attaching them end to end like if you put your fingers together, I create like a little overlap. I'm using that 9-inch bat to make sure that the round of the football doesn't stick through the middle of the oval. In fact, I'm tightening the oval up just a little bit. I don't want it so small that it's not going to be able to be a good base, but I don't want it so wide that the round of the bowl's not going to push through. Then I just score those little ends, slip them, right? Just use a little pressure to put them together. And then I'm using the rounded end of the wooden knife just to clean up that seam, help it disappear a little bit. And just use a little sponge to clean it all up so that no one can tell where the seam is. Just looks like a continuous ring all the way around. Just a little more shaping just to get it just right. Again, I'm just kind of testing it and measuring and making sure it's going to work. Then I can set that aside. Next, I am lifting up my slab and I am draping it over the football. For those of you that were wondering what the little bowl was for, that was to keep the football from rolling away. So yeah, you'll want a little bowl for sure. I'm setting cups under the edges of the clay to give it a wavy, clamshell appearance. This is why I didn't worry about the slab being in a perfect symmetrical oval. This part here takes a few minutes, as I really want to give the bowl a good look. I want that wavy clam-like appearance to flow nicely through the clay. I want it to look a little bit random, but I also want it to look good and to look nice. I'm setting my coil foot on the slab to figure out exactly where it needs to go, then using the 9-inch square plastibat and my ruler to check that the base will help the bowl sit flat. With the foot in place, I'm using the needle tool to mark where the foot goes. I'm scoring the foot, going through the score, slip, and smooth method. But before actually scoring the bowl, I am going to cut a little groove for the foot by carving out some of the clay using the rounded edge of the loop tool. Because of that rounded edge, it's going to create a nice little seat for that foot to fit right into. But after carving out some clay, I'll score it. I like to create some good crisscross pattern going on. Create a lot of grab to those two pieces to hold on to each other. When I add the slip, not only am I filling up that little carved out area, but I'm adding a little bit extra. It's always my opinion, a little too much slip is good because you can always remove it. Not enough slip, and usually it's too late to fix it after things dry out. But I attach the two parts by setting the foot on the bowl and gently press into the groove. Again, gently press. I don't want to break the bowl and I don't want to deform the foot. I then reset the plastibat and measure the distance with my ruler to make sure the foot will help the bowl sit flat and even. For smoothing out the slip, I like to use that rounded edge of the wooden knife. It's rounded like a finger, but it's also flat, which allows me to get into the tight angled corners where the bowl and the foot meet. And then I'll follow that with a small damp sponge, which pulls away any excess slip missed by the wooden knife and gives the surface a really smooth and clean feel. I sign my name while the clay is still soft. For impressing my name, I don't hold the needle tool like a pencil, as it would just tear up the clay, but instead lay the needle tool almost flat and drag the needle to create clean, straight lines that I'll form into letters. I've let this sit uncovered for about 8 hours now, and the clay has stiffened to leather hard. I gently remove the cups and other objects I've used to support the clay. Coming in from two angles, I lift the drape mold by lifting the football and carefully balance it with one hand while I remove the other objects out of my workspace. Flipping the clay over is kind of scary, so I'm going to use the 9-inch plastibat to help me set the drape mold right side up by setting it on the foot, and then with a careful amount of pressure against the football and the bat, I turn the drape mold right side up and gently set it down on the 13-inch round plastibat. Squeezing the football, I pull it out of the bowl. And now I'm using the loop tool to shave down any jagged edges. I want the bowl to have a nice feel for it wherever anybody lifts it from. So yes, part of that means getting rid of any sharp, jagged edges. After that, I'll move to a lightly damp sponge, which I'll use to round off any remaining jagged or sharp angled corners. Again, it's all about that nice smooth surface. It's a bowl. People want to touch it, people want to pick it up, people want to hold it. So I want it to be inviting to the touch. So again, I'll just work that sponge a little bit more. The completed, though unfired, project. A clamshell-shaped bowl that will look nice as a kitchen table centerpiece or decorative bowl elsewhere.